everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of Office Hours. This is episode number 96. We're closing in on 100. And these are strange times, aren't they? I've been thinking a lot in this last week or 2 weeks about how many people must be moving from tabletop gatherings, right? Meeting at a friend's house, hanging out in your mom's basement, the utilities room of your apartment building, wherever you play role-playing games face to face with your friends. A lot of people are having to leave that behind, and some people are missing out on getting to play role-playing games at all. So right before this episode started, like maybe an hour ago, I started thinking, you know what, I should put together an episode of Office Hours that's just exclusively about playing games online, like moving your group to a virtual tabletop, the kinds of challenges you might run into. Now, this isn't that episode because it takes me a little while to, like put an episode together. So this isn't that episode, but I think probably that's something that we'll look at on the next episode of Office Hours. I think that's what I'll do. I think either I'll pull questions from the normal question list, or we'll just sit down and talk about, how to get through a period where you can't get together with your friends. I think it would be useful for folks who are moving away too, right? I get a lot of questions from people who are like, I moved to somewhere remote, or I live somewhere where I don't speak the language as easily, or, I've just gone away to college or university, and now I don't have access to my regular gaming group. And so rather than not playing role-playing games, there are other ways to do it. And I've been doing those things for 5 years now, like very regularly. So I feel like I have some thoughts to share. It's been interesting for me, especially the last little while, especially the last week, where Roll20 new accounts have just jumped through the roof. There's been so much talk about people playing on a virtual tabletop. So I think it'd be really cool to get a chance to sit down and talk about that. So keep an eye out for a future episode where we'll talk about those things, maybe episode number 97. But for today, it's business as usual, which means that I've got 3 questions from you, my lovely audience, about playing tabletop RPGs. I have a question about picking a good group. I have a question about maps and props, and we have a question about text in a role-playing format. So those things are what we're going to talk about today. So if you have a question that you want to submit for a future episode, if you're like, oh, Adam answers questions about RPGs, you can find the form where you can submit that question over on my website, www.adam-koble.com. There's an Office Hours link. Just click that, fill out the form. If you'd like to record your voice, that would be nice. But if not, that's okay too. We've had lots of questions in both directions, and I'll try to answer it, or a question very much like it, on a future episode. So today, we're going to start with a question about how to pick a good group and what kinds of things to be thinking about and looking at when you do that. So Frida has a question for us today. Let's start here.
Hello, Adam. I have struggled a lot recently with putting a group together. I mostly run D&D 5th edition, and I play online using Roll20, and find it to be a comfortable and good way to play. The issue I've been having is finding people online that I feel safe and comfortable around. When posting online looking for players, usually on Reddit or Roll20, I mention that the game is LGBTQIA+ friendly, since that can act as a bit of a filter against unpleasant people. However, this hasn't really been enough, and I've had to dismantle a couple of groups now, because several people wouldn't give up being ableist, sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic, and so on. At this point, I've become very sensitive to any red flags on this, and can't seem to even get past the recruiting stage without reading into what everyone is saying, and then just abandoning the whole thing. Thing is, I'm a trans woman, and even when playing just over voice, people don't pick up on this, and I'm afraid of playing with people who may secretly dislike people like me, not to mention the bad vibes such people tend to bring to a table. I am at a loss of how to deal with this. So my question is, how can I filter people out when putting a group together without being off-putting or exposing myself to potential danger? Or have I simply become oversensitive?
So we're going to start at the end. We're going to start with that last question. Have I simply become oversensitive? Now, this is a personal thing for me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, but this is a personal thing for me. I have a deep aversion to the weaponization of the term oversensitive. It's almost always used to shut someone up or to force someone to stop exerting their own agency in a situation. If you feel unsafe or you feel uncomfortable or you just don't feel like you're having a good time because of something that is bothering you, right? You have that little twitch in the back of your head saying like, I'm uncomfortable about this. I'm not saying don't analyze your own thoughts and feelings. I'm not saying don't think about what you're feeling and dig into it, but don't let other people tell you you're being oversensitive, right? Don't let anyone say to you, you should just put up with what you are being given and take what you can get, right? Don't do that, right? Often thinking about our own thoughts and feelings as oversensitivity is the result of thinking that other people think that about us, right? Like if you are feeling unsafe or nervous or uncomfortable, that's okay. Those feelings are real and they're telling you something, right? Let me give you an analogy. Let me tell you a story. So this isn't about a tabletop role-playing game group, but it's about a social dynamic around games. So I used to play World of Warcraft, right? So I used to play World of Warcraft. I was maybe, I don't know, 25, 26, and I didn't really have the sort of solid fundamental understanding of myself as a person that I do now back then, because what 26-year-old knows who they are, really? Like, I mean, hell, I don't really yet, but you know what I mean? I wasn't as confident. And so I got invited to join a guild, right? A group of players in that game. And, they were friends of friends, and I hadn't met most of them. So I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll try this. I'd like to be able to take on some of the end game content. I'd like to have a guild. Like you hear all these stories about like great gaming groups and great, World of Warcraft guilds and great MMO groups and stuff. And I felt like I wanted to be a part of that. I wanted to be part of that social environment. So I was like, okay, yeah, you're friends of my friend and my friend wouldn't put me in a position to be uncomfortable, right? So let's try it. And so, we played, and every once in a while, someone would say something insensitive, right? Now, up to this point, it had never been anything like outwardly, obviously, aggressively sexist or homophobic or racist, but there were little hints here and there, little red flags that had I had the perspective then that I have now, I would have noticed and realized what they were indicating, right? But at the time I was like, you know what? It's fine. I'm the newcomer here. I don't want to upset anybody. I don't want to shift anything in a way that's going to make anybody else uncomfortable. I don't want to embarrass my friend who invited me into this group, right? I didn't want to, because I thought it would create tension. So I just kind of, let it make me feel a little bad, and we moved on, right? And at one point, we were in the midst of a big, difficult boss encounter, right? We were dying. People were getting frustrated. The tension in the group was getting higher and higher. And at one point, one of the raid leaders said, essentially, "Fuck this. This is gay. We're done." And I was like, okay. So instead of making a scene about it in the voice chat, instead of saying anything, because I didn't want to stand up in front of the group and be like, you're being wrong. I reached out to the raid leader and I said, hey, so I really wasn't comfortable with what you said at the end of the last raid. Can we talk about that? And the response I got was, well, I didn't mean gay like in a pejorative way. I just mean like it was gay, like it sucks. And I didn't know what to say about that, right? Because I was like, well, that's what I'm saying. Like this is the problem, right? The fact that you don't understand that this is a problem. And I realized it didn't have to be all that big for me to realize that it just wasn't okay, right? Like, you don't have to wait for someone to use a transphobic slur to back out. I should have recognized the permissive qualities of the group, that kind of stuff was just allowed to happen. I had to realize that there wasn't a space for me. And so, Frida, for you, I think it's relatively easy to recognize when a group is going to be a problem, right? You can usually tell. People will tend to reveal themselves to you quite quickly. And I think that it's okay to be sensitive. I think it's okay to bail out in the recruiting stage. It does require, and this is something that I think a lot of marginalized people come to realize, it does require recognizing the difference between malice and ignorance, and knowing for you personally how much ignorance you can subject yourself to every single day without it negatively impacting your health, right? Your mental health, your well-being, your continued love of the hobby. I know so many people who have been driven out of tabletop role-playing games by groups like this, right? By groups that show those red flags, right? Minding how much work you are willing to do for a group and how much you can put that out there is going to be the real test. That's for you to work on yourself and to decide, right? And don't think, and I think sometimes we get this in our head, that we think that being capable of enduring bullshit is somehow valiant. That somehow being a person who is in a position of marginalization, enduring racism, enduring ableism, enduring sexism, etc., is somehow a way that we can prove we're not like those other gays. We can play ball, right? We can hang out with the boys and we can tough it out, but we shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to. I shouldn't have to. No one should. We should be able to play with people who we are comfortable with. We should be able to play with people who let us be ourselves and who embrace that, even if they don't know who we are, right? I guarantee you that raid leader wasn't trying to be homophobic towards me personally. And I'm sure if I had said to him, hey man, you saying that something is gay, meaning it's bad, hurts me personally. I am a queer person and you are hurting me, right? He probably would have said, oh, well, you're different, right? You're like, it's not, I don't mean like gay like you're gay. I mean gay like it sucks, right? It would have been the same thing. These kinds of behaviors are so ingrained and require so much work for people to overcome and to get better at. There's no reason for you to do that work both for yourself and for them, right? So there's no reason for you to have to endure any of this, especially not in an environment where you have the entire internet to draw from. Now, I know it doesn't feel that way, but let me give you a little bit of hot for teacher style advice, right? So for me, I don't play role-playing games with people that I think are going to make me uncomfortable. And if I do accidentally find myself in a group where we do say a one shot and somebody's being a piece of shit, I don't ever play with them again, right? Now, we give people room to change, but that's about personal interaction, right? If you're just finding strangers on the internet, I think it's reasonable to say, I don't want to play in groups with people who are not capable of upholding a certain standard of communication. Because the fundamental thing at the very core of both relationships and role-playing groups is the ability to be vulnerable, by which I mean reveal our internal narrative, either about ourselves or about our imagined selves, to other people. Because you cannot create with a group of people without there being some degree of vulnerability. And if you can't even be vulnerable enough to say, I am a trans person, I need you to respect that. If you don't feel safe doing that, how are you ever going to have those moments that we want so well in role-playing games? We are so thirsty for those moments of connection, and I think if you think about your favorite game, either the game that you've played in or games you've watched or listened to on the internet, you know those moments, right? You think about maybe Titanfall. You think about, Berg trying to climb up that hill while suffering. You think about Zeke and Anne having that tearful moment in Blades, right? These moments that we go looking for, you don't get those for free. You get those by building a relationship with the other players. And you can't build that relationship unless you feel safe. Tension in game is a reward for safety and vulnerability out of the game. So how can I filter people out when putting a group together without being off-putting or exposing myself to potential danger? So let's deal with these one at a time. Don't expose yourself to danger. Don't do anything that feels dangerous for you. You know, don't use your real name, right? Don't post your home address. Don't give people your personal email if you don't feel comfortable doing that, right? Create a nom de jeu and use that instead, right? Find ways to protect yourself on the internet. We have been refining and practicing these things for a long time. You should not have to endanger yourself either physically or emotionally or mentally to play a role-playing game. Do not think that that is a ticket for entry into this world of RPGs, right? You're allowed to come up with a cool Dungeon Master alias instead of your real name, if that's what you want, right? So don't endanger yourself. Lean into the side of never playing a role-playing game ever again and staying safe rather than risking harm to play games, right? Games are important. Games are fun. Games are good for you. They're a great social experience. I'm not saying we should all just give up role-playing games. Please don't give up role-playing games. They're cool. I'm just saying your well-being is more important than any tabletop game, Roll20 or otherwise, you could ever be in. So don't worry as much about that. The other bit about being off-putting, I kind of think that we need to be a little off-putting sometimes. And by we, I mean like queer people, in which I include, you know, trans people and then also people who are dealing with other forms of marginalization. I think sometimes we just have to be off-putting. It's just about targeting that in the right direction. Now, if you put in your request for a game, say you're like, I'm looking for players. I want people who are queer friendly. I want people who are aware of ableist and racist and homophobic language and who will not do those things. The kinds of people who will find that off-putting are the kinds of people you don't want in your game anyway. Because what's a safety flag for you is going to be a genders on their character sheets flag for some other dirtbag. So in a way, what you're doing is pulling in the right people with one hand and pushing away the wrong people with the other, right? And you are allowed to do that. There's a reason why, generally speaking, if somebody comes into chat in the middle of a game that I'm playing where we have pronouns in the overlay, and the first thing they say is, why are there pronouns in the overlay? I know, I'm like, you've got maybe 2 or 3 more messages before you are gone. Because that's a flag. That's a red flag for me, right? People being drawn to that in a way that makes them uncomfortable. Now, there's a larger conversation here about education and about care and about helping people go from being dirtbags to not being dirtbags, but that's not your job. I'm going to say it again. Not your job, Frida. Now, to a degree, it's my job, right? It's my job to create an environment and to talk about tabletop and to include these queer conversations in that because I'm in a position of privilege. I have some insulation. I have an audience, and that's part of what my social responsibility is. But for you, Frida, no. So don't, and I know Frida didn't mention this, but I know that this is something that a lot of people feel that they need to do or feel like they're required to do. You do not have to reform people, right? Like with that World of Warcraft guild, I left. I found another excuse to leave the guild, right? I was like, I don't really have the scheduling time for it. I should be focusing on other stuff. My work is really busy right now. And I stopped playing. But the seed of that was, y'all are a bunch of homophobia permissive motherfuckers. And sure, I could have changed the culture of that guild. I could have busted my ass. I could have had conversations with people. I could have been off-putting, and I have definitely been that in other situations before. But you don't have to. It is nobody's job to reform people, right? So what this means for Frida and for people in Frida's position, what this means is understanding how much risk you are willing to take on, how much work you're willing to do to adjust a group. How many times do you want to have to correct people when they use the wrong pronouns? How many times do you want to have to tell people, hey, that's actually a racial slur. Maybe we could not ever use it again in the history of time, right? How much educating do you want to do, and how much is that going to come up in your game? And honestly, this is something that I think everybody should think about, because I have to do it too, right? Like for me, part of my ethos is that if I am guesting on a show, if I'm on a role-playing show, if I'm GMing or playing, I don't play with people who I already know to have problems being ableist, sexist, racist, homophobic, etc., right? Like if I know that that's the case, I just won't play. But sometimes people, try to make a joke that isn't funny. Sometimes people say something without realizing it. In the moment, in the middle of a show, I'm not going to say, whoa, hold on, stop. We need to have a long conversation about why it's not okay for you to say that was gay. But I don't let it fly either, right? I will talk about it on the break. I'll talk about it afterwards. And if the person is defensive, if they push back, I don't try to fix them. I just don't ever play with them again, right? But that might be different for you. There are levels and degrees of that, certainly, right? Like casual, accidental, ignorant homophobia is one thing, but a player who intentionally uses homophobic slurs, even after being told that's not okay, that might interrupt a game midway through. So I think what you want to do is give people the opportunity to self-select, right? Put in your profile, put it in your request for players, try doing a one-shot, right? Staves mentioned this in chat. If you want to play with somebody new, try doing a one-shot, right? Do an audition. And it's not an audition to see if they're good role players. It's an audition to see how well they fit with the group, right? For me, to kind of drag it back to the hot for teacher aspect of this question, for me, I don't get into relationships with people until I know that that's a relatively safe thing for me to do. Doesn't matter if it's playing role-playing games, if it's a romantic relationship. Well, it might be for them. It's not for me. But dating, like anything that's more serious than just casually running into each other, I need to know that there's somebody that I can be comfortable around first. And role-playing games is no different, right? Role-playing games are a vulnerable, creative activity that you are doing with other people. And if they can't even respect who you are as a person, right? Whether they know it or not, how are they going to respect your creative input in a game? Right? So I don't know. Maybe this is just one of those questions where I'm mostly interested in reassuring Frida and people like her. But Frida, other people suffering from the same problem, you don't have to play with people who suck. Question your sensitivity, question the way that you think and feel, but don't bring your boundaries down just because you think someone else might think you're being oversensitive. I can't make that call for you, Frida. That is entirely on you. Stay safe, play with people who support you, and don't put up with bullshit. Don't let anybody step on you or the things that you need. I guess unless the thing you need is to be stepped on, but that's a question for another show.
Hey Adam, as a former GM, now first-time player, I always loved creating or purchasing colorful, detailed battle maps for my players. Having an exciting new locale for a battle or even just a conversation was always something I hoped to provide, and playing online has made this relatively straightforward. Now that it's not me behind the screen, I've been playing with a GM who cares very little for maps in Roll20. Sometimes a black rectangle or a white backdrop is drawn just so the players can know the confines of the battle, but even that has been forgone for some fights, relying on the players purely imagining where their enemies and allies are located and fishing for specific environmental details and props so that they can be used. Do you feel that having a semi-detailed battle map for players to gauge their own distances and discover aspects of the environment is an essential element of role-playing games? Or are there situations where the theater of the mind is entirely sufficient? Thanks, Tactical Luke.
Yeah. So I'm going to give some very, very classic office hours advice going all the way back to the earliest episodes. It really, really depends on the game, right? A skirmish between a handful of warriors and the player characters in a game like Mouse Guard, right? Say you've got your mouse patrol, you're fighting a couple of weasels. Theater of the mind, no problem, right? Because interaction in that way doesn't matter, right? You know what you're doing, you're describing stuff, but distance is sort of irrelevant. Positioning isn't really a thing, right? Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. We got 4 level 15 player characters. We've got some regular fighter enemies. We've got some rogue enemies. We got 2 different kinds of spellcasters. And we got a big giant. But there's no map. Good fucking luck. Right? Like, it really, really depends on the game. The Dungeons and Dragons, for example, because it's the example, right? It's our common tongue. Dungeons and Dragons likes to pretend. Let me phrase that more accurately. Dungeons and Dragons lies to you and says that you don't need a map. I think that, sure, some groups can probably figure out whether or not where they are or whether a spell captures the area. But a map is very, very, very helpful in that situation, right? Now, what that map looks like is going to vary deeply depending on the group, right? For me, I don't use maps unless it's we're rolling initiative, we're coming out of initiative, we need to know 5 feet, 10 feet, diagonals, spell effects. I find that really fun, right? Because the game is designed for it. And so using the thing it's designed for, turns out it's more fun to play football with a football than it is to play football, I don't know, with a sphere full of eels trying to bite you, right? Like, you really need the right tool for the job. And as cool as sphere of eels ball sounds, it would have to, by necessity, have different rules than football. So consider how much you care about that stuff as both a player or a game master, right? Now, it's clear, Luke, that you care about this as a GM, right? There's something really fun about putting together a detailed map. I mean, if you've watched Descent into Avernus, you know that I like putting together maps for environments and encounters where we don't have that, right? Like, I love being able to be like, okay, so here's the base layer, and then I got some fog on top of it, and we got our miniatures, and then I have some animated spell effects, and I love it in the same way that I love doing that when I had the opportunity at the table, right? It fits the game. And like Luke, I think I would probably have a really hard time playing in a 5th edition game where that same energy wasn't present, right? I think that I would miss it. As a DM personally, though, I think you can go a long way on just a shitty line drawing. I think the MS Paint map solves what is the core problem, right? Now, the core problem isn't imagining things, right? You remember last office hours, we talked about showing players photos or concept art or anything like that, right? This is kind of in the same vein. what a map does isn't filling in creative gaps in your brain. A map is a constraint. In fact, a map makes you imagine less, right? This is what we talked about in the last episode. You imagine less because you have a concrete object to measure. It becomes real. This is very, if we wanted to really get into the philosophy of this question, it's very Baudrillard, right? It's very like the map is the territory, and so it constrains our dreams of that territory. So in some situations, the problem that we're really solving makes the other things about a role-playing game more difficult to do. Ultimately, the mechanical function of a map is to tell us relative locations, right? It's one thing to say to a group, you are standing in the middle of a tavern, right? Versus you are sitting in a chair in the middle of a tavern. There is a table in front of you with 3 other chairs. One of your companions is sitting in another of the chair. There's a bar 10 feet behind you. The bartender is 5 feet behind that bar. The window 40 feet across from you bursts open and goblins spill in. There are now 4 goblins. The goblins are spaced 5 feet apart in a line north to south. Now, I can envision that in my head, but by the end of that sentence, I forgot the beginning of the sentence. I still don't know where everything is in relation to everything else. And with a game like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, you need to constantly know where everything is. So, okay, if you're one of those people that can envision that situation I just described, all right, so the door opens, 2 humans come in. The goblins that burst into the window, 2 of them move diagonally 15 feet to the northeast, 2 of them move east, 1 moves 5 feet, the one further south moves 10 feet. One of them, the second one from the northmost point of the room, draws a knife. Where are the humans? Right? So it becomes this complex envisioning thing that now everyone is having to do. And the more detail you need to successfully navigate the game, the more necessary a visual representation of that space is. The more we need the map, right? I think that this happens across the board with role-playing games where we've been playing, let's use Court of Swords as an example. We've been playing Court of Swords for a long time, 3 years now, I think, and for most of that, let's say Berg and Ramus have been characters in that game. Now, if I asked Dan and Zeke and JP and Max to all write 3 sentences describing Ramus, how accurate do you think that they would be? Now, it's a trick question because accurate implies that there is a territory for this map. There's no real Ramus Krill. There's only what we have in our head. And what I envision when I think of Ramus is a combination of descriptions that Dan has given, fan art of Ramus, and Dan himself, right? Like if I close my eyes and I think about Berg, I can envision his hair cut. I can envision his beard. I can envision the weapon he's wielding. I can see his armor, but he's just got Max's face. Like he's green and he's got tusks, but it's still like, that's it. And I don't think that would be the case for everybody else because there is no idealized perfect version. And so what a map does is presents that thing. It says you're no longer looking at the shadow on the cave wall, you're looking at the object. And this is something that comes up a lot in role-playing games, even on basic character details, right? What gender is a character? Right? Look at how many times, and this is a great point from Chad, Radio Green Tea says this, DJ Wheat almost exclusively plays women. Still, his characters get misgendered because we look at Wheat and we think he is doing the thing, right? This happens with race. How many people do you think envision NPCs in the Court of Swords as being white people, right? We do this because we have a base understanding in our mind of what a thing is. And as we are described that thing, our brain fills in the gap. Now, the inverse of this is if we look at a map on the table, we have to then acclimatize our brain to the map being reality. And so you'll watch, this is a thing that happens a lot, again, in Court of Swords. JP asks me all the time, is this map real? Have you ever heard him say that before? Like, is this actually here? Are these rocks actually here? Is this a slope or is this flat? Right? Because what he's doing is trying to translate a flat, two-dimensional version of the map into a three-dimensional tactical overlay in his mind, right? He's trying to bridge that gap between the environment in his head and the environment on the table, because again, in this case, the map is still not the territory. The territory is some hybrid of what you imagine to be happening and what is in play. And this is why rules that feel like they don't have consistency seem so jarring, right? If a rule says that a character with 25 strength can lift a truck, but then they have a truck-sized object that a character with 25 strength can't lift, then incongruities start to wear at us. So I think that you have to, as always, and this is one of the fundamental pieces of advice from Office Hours, what you must do is what the game demands, right? And sometimes the game will outwardly demand it, right? Ryutama, for example. Ryutama will say, in combat, you must use this map. You must use the egg map with the little squiggly lines. If you don't, you've now just broken the rules of the game. However, as we know, games lie. They lie to sell copies. They lie to seem like better games than they are. Games lie to you for lots of reasons. Sometimes they say, you can play this game in your mind. But when I see that in a game like 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, I laugh. It makes me think you've never even played your own game, because after a certain level of complexity, that question or that statement becomes false for most people. Now, I know there are going to be people out there who say, bullshit, Adam, I can both GM and play a 20th level Dungeons & Dragons campaign with battles consisting of dozens of foes, and I can tell you exactly where they all are at any given time. And to that I say, get out of here, robot. Because I don't think that most players of role-playing games can process that information. So do what the game demands, either explicitly or implicitly, right? Start there. Then do what's fun for you. So if you're a GM and you're like, you know what? I don't need to make a map. I don't need a map of the town. I don't need a map of the city. I don't need a map of the cosmos. I don't need a map of this battle, but I want to make one because it's fun. I want to make one because I like building them. I want to go shopping through the catalog of maps. I want to pick the perfect map, right? I want to adjust the color. I want to add effects. I really want to wow my players because it's fun for me. So do it. Now, Luke's question takes on a bit of a weird flip, because what Luke does as a GM or DM and what Luke hopes for in a game is a fairly common human relationship problem, right? We've talked about this in Hot for Teacher. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you is a flawed maxim, because it requires an expectation that they will do unto you in return. So if you go into a group thinking, this is how I game master, I make detailed maps, that makes me happy, ergo, I expect other DMs and GMs to do the same. And when they don't, I'm disappointed. I think Luke would probably be somewhat disappointed by my shitty Adam Coble drawings. And that's okay, right? Because what you have to do is instead treat people the way they would like to be treated, right? So if this game with its shitty Adam Koebel maps isn't satisfying for you, bring that up, right? I bet you if you mention to your GM, hey, in my game, I found this really easy way to put together cool maps in Roll20. Would you like me to show you some tricks? I've had some really good success. They might say, oh, yeah. The only reason I don't do it is because, I don't know how, or I've never, it always seemed really intimidating. Maybe you have something to share as a GM, but don't come into that conversation trying to manipulate them into doing something, right? Share your enthusiasm, share your passion, be ready for them to say, no, I just don't like maps. In which case you can say, well, I really need to play in a game that has concrete maps in combat. This is really hard for me to play. I hope you find players that are a better fit. Thanks, right? That's a thing you can do. In the same way that Frida doesn't have to play with people that she doesn't feel comfortable with, Luke, you don't have to play in a group that isn't playing the way you want, right? Like I've told you before, not Luke particularly, but you as an audience, I've told you before about the game of Exalted I played where the GM described everything for us because he had a creative vision and wanted to make sure everything fit. So he authored our actions. He'd ask us what we wanted to do and we would roll the dice, but he was the only one allowed to narrate what happened. I quit that game pretty quick because I like describing things. So don't play with people that are not a good fit for you. Be gentle, right? Don't be a dick about it. Don't be like maps or get the fuck out. Share your passion, share your knowledge, but share it because you're passionate about it, not because you're trying to manipulate somebody, right? Yes, maybe you love Deep Space Nine, but do not force your significant other to watch every single episode with you, expecting them to become a fan, right? Share what you love about Deep Space Nine, and then give them the opportunity to try it out themselves. But keep in mind that some games do require specific things to make them work. For example, you're probably not going to be able to play Dungeon World with no character sheets. So yeah, it's one of those things that it's personal preference. And for you, Luke, it's easy to make maps, but maybe your GM doesn't know that or doesn't know how or is stumbling or whatever. Find a way to share your passion and hopefully they will come along for the ride. And if not, suggest perhaps that as a whole group, if you like the group that you're in, but this map thing's fucking you up, play a game that fits their style better. Be like, hey, you know what? You don't actually even have to draw maps if we play this other game, right? So try other games. Try stuff that doesn't require. Here's an example. I don't play drawing games. I like the idea of Quiet Year, for example. I refuse to play. I hate it. I hate to draw. I won't do it. You can't make me. I get that it's a good game. I encourage people to play it, but I'm not going to do it because I hate it. I don't like drawing. It's not fun for me. So I've made that decision, right? And so now I know what to look for, what not to look for. And if I were with a group that was everybody was really into drawing maps, I would suggest that game to them, and then I would probably leave the group until they wanted to change something to a different game. Yeah. Right? And this is true of everybody, right? Maybe you don't like high fantasy. Maybe you don't like karaoke. Maybe your group is very theatrical and you don't like it. Maybe your group is focused on immersion and you're more of a director stance player. It's all about finding the right group and making it fit and helping everybody find a place where they can creatively bring something to the table, right? You're a guitar player. If somebody hands you some drumsticks, you're not going to know what to do with them, right? So find a group that's already got a drummer and needs a badass guitar player. That's you, Luke. You're the badass guitar player. So I'm going to try not to digress too hard on our last question. I'm glad I only have 15 minutes because I could go on a long, ridiculous discussion about the history of role-playing games here. So I saved this one for last so that I wouldn't ruin the episode rambling about it. But it's an interesting one. It talks about format, and I think that it's something that a lot of people are thinking about these days.
Hey, Adam. I'm going through some difficult times right now, but still want to DM. I was thinking of trying a text-based RPG where the players could check in periodically throughout the day and post their responses. So it'd be like you're almost playing nonstop, but just in bits and pieces. I was wondering if you had any ideas on the mechanics of this and how to better narrate as opposed to if it was a real-time text-based RPG. Thanks.
So this is like the oldest of old schools. Like what Tim is talking about predates even Dungeons and Dragons, right? The idea of asynchronous interaction over text goes back a long, long way, right? And in the game context, the first thing I think of is play by post diplomacy, right? Play by mail diplomacy. So even before Dungeons and Dragons was a thing, Dave and Gary's friends, they would play games of diplomacy over snail mail. So they would write their orders and they would send them in, and then somebody would receive them. Whoever had the board at their house would receive them, move all the pieces around. That sounds so weird and familiar, doesn't it? They'd move all the pieces around. They would rewrite out the new board state. They would mail it to everybody. Everybody would mail each other, and then they would send back in their reports, and it would just go back and forth like that until the game was done. And these things would take years, right? Even before that, that's why people played chess over the mail, et cetera, et cetera. Like all that stuff happened it's happened in the past, right? And this thread has become more or less popular over time, but it's been reiterated more and more, right? So you would see like mushes and muds, which were initially BBS based, so bulletin board system, pre-internet, bulletin board based, multi-user play-by-post games. So you would either log in live and engage in a online like chat, or you would, like a forum, you would log in, you would go to the forum sub-forum for whatever room your character was in, and whoever else was logged into that forum, you would roleplay. And then if you left that room, you'd go and post into the tavern and be like, Throndir enters the tavern fancifully. He is wearing a green cap and is bleeding from his left nostril. And you'd post. And then Throndir's friend, Gorlock, would be like, aha, Gorlock rises from the table with a smile, quaffing his ale. He looks over at Throndir and waves and says, hello, Throndir. Send, right? And so you do that, right? That's how you would play. And there would be varying degrees of complexity. Sometimes there would be in and out of character ways of formatting. There would be rules for certain things. Usually these would be free form role playing. So you would work out creative differences without dice. You would just discuss it, or there would be some other way to do it. And these things have continued to evolve. And in fact, not that long ago, I think back in 2014 or 2015, I wrote a playset for a website called Storium. Storium is somewhere between a forum game, a constrained forum game platform, Roll20, and a collaborative storytelling environment, right? So what you would do with Storium is you would, it essentially creates its own unique subforum. You would get writing prompts, you'd get character types, you'd buy a pack, and then you would recruit players, and then you would play by post according to the schedule of the group. So it might be like everybody has to post once a week. Everybody has to post once a day. Everybody has to post once a month, depending on your schedule. And that's still happening in various play-by-post formats. And I think there are, I don't play in any of them myself because I'm so busy, but there are also discords. There are entire discords structured in the same way. And they're more like playing a live role-playing game because, like IRC, it goes by and it's done, right? So if you look at, say, for example, Far Verona, right? The Far Verona experience, the whole Far Verona multimedia experience consists of a live game streamed in that game setting, right? A play-by-post diplomacy game, essentially a diplomacy stand-in on a 1-month cycle, and multiple branches of both freeform and structured role play within that environment, right? Voice chat, Roll20 games, and all of those things contribute to a central universe, which is Far Verona. So yes, it's absolutely doable. It is totally fun to do, but there are challenges, right? So there are some challenges to this style of play. The first is the double-edged sword of asynchronicity. So if you're playing an asynchronous game, people's availability becomes the big slowdown point, right? Now, I might have lots of time. Maybe I work an office job and I have a lot of time to alt-tab to other stuff, and maybe I can post 10, 15, 20 times a day, right? So my needs are very high, but I might also be in a group with somebody who can only post once a week. And if I get into a scene with that person, I am going to lose my fucking mind, because I'm going to be like, hell yeah, that's a scene. Me and Throndir. And we're going to have this dramatic scene in the tavern. And then we're going to go and we're going to fight the orcs. So cool. And so I lay in my initial descriptor. I'm like, welcome, Throndir. We have waited for you a long time. My axe is thirsty for orcish blood. Will you join me in my quest? Post. And then we wait. And an hour goes by, and 2 hours go by, and a day goes by, and I'm like, God damn it, Throndir, come on, man. We got to go kill those orcs. And maybe the other channels, maybe the orc team, they're getting their shit together. And I'm like, Throndir, come on, man. We got to go. And the narrative, and Throndir just stands there staring at us. And then suddenly the orcs break into the tavern, and I get my ass kicked because Throndir can only post once a week. So for me, that's the first challenge, right? Is making sure that everybody can, in good faith, agree to a posting schedule. Do not miss this point, right? Make sure you mention it during your recruitment phase, because if you don't, this will happen, I promise. The other thing that I have had this experience with play-by-post is, let's call it the enthusiasm curve. So the enthusiasm curve in a play-by-post game tends to be like this. We start up here. We got brand new characters. We got all kinds of like fun stuff. We're planning ideas. We got a new setting we never played in. And then this is how the game goes. Just drops right off, right? Because people are really excited right away. And it's one thing to cancel a tabletop game group. It's one thing to have to text your friends and be like, sorry, everybody, I just don't have the energy to play today. I know I'm letting you down and everybody's upset, but let's reschedule for next week. It's another thing to just be like, well, I just don't have time to post. And if I don't have time to post, I probably don't have time to explain that I don't have time to post. Because if I'm posting an explanation, I could probably just make Throndir open his goddamn mouth and do something, right? And that curve where we think at the beginning, we think, yeah, I'm going to be able to post 3 times every day. That seems reasonable, right? All you got to do, log into the forum, post 3 times. That's easy, right? How long before you think that that becomes impossible? It really does have to become a habit. You have to work your way into it. The other thing is that if you're not playing with people you know, and this is true about the internet in general, it's much easier to ghost somebody on the internet. So now, not only am I trying to convince Throndir to join me on my quest against the orcs, Throndir has disappeared. Throndir has vanished into outer space and maybe will never speak to me again. And then, of course, as soon as I'm like, you know what, fuck you, Throndir, and I leave the tavern, Throndir's player will respond to me in an empty room. So finding a group that fits your schedule and each other's schedules Very important, right? Really helpful. Definitely something like be realistic about how much you can commit to. Be realistic about how much everyone is willing to play, and then engage in that way. This is why I would not suggest jumping into an existing play-by-email game or universe, right? Like, don't rush out there, find a group that's been playing forever and has 100 players, and then just jump in, because, you know, you don't know the group, you don't know their playing schedule, you don't know how that's going to work. You're going to have people disappear. My suggestion would be, like you would do with a normal face-to-face group or Roll20 group, pick people that will play on the schedule that you want to play to. But yeah, to Londell in chat's point, you are always held hostage by the slowest, least posting player. Yeah, that's a great point. So just be aware of that. The other challenge, and I guess the other challenge is verbosity, right? In my experience, in a lot of these games, the people you end up playing with tend to want to be novelists. So what you end up in a position to do is, I tend to like lots of punchy short posts. I like saying, I say this, maybe a little flourish, you say that, I say this, you say that, we go back and forth, right? Some people want to be like, Throndir opens his mouth 46 pages later. What do you think, friend dwarf? And I'm like, motherfucker, I don't know. That was 8,600 words. I didn't read any of that, right? So again, limiting post count, right? How many, this is the other end of the spectrum, is that there are going to be over communicators. There are going to be people who want to write entire chapters. And if that's not your vibe, be aware of that, right? So do you want permanence? If you want permanence, go for a forum, go for something you can search, right? If you don't care about permanence, but you want something more like the face-to-face experience, IRC, Twitter even, right? Discord, semi-permanent or impermanent versions of the game, right? Because they fly by. Consider how often you want to post, right? Consider how often you're going to be able to. Consider pacing of that and how that's going to work. Consider structure, right? It's definitely doable. It's definitely possible. I have neither the time nor the energy for them anymore, but there used to be a time where I enjoyed those kinds of games, and they're definitely, there's a long history of them. There's lots of reasons to play, but they provide their own challenges. So if you, like so many people, are looking for other ways to experience role-playing games besides jamming yourself into your mom's basement with 12 of your sweatiest friends, consider text-based play. Honestly, I feel like text-based role-playing is really good for people that have like day jobs. Like if you have a day job where you can occasionally check in on a forum, right? You work in an office and maybe they don't really care if you want to pop open, you know, the Internet by Night forum and post your vampire fan fiction, then go ahead and do that, right? Like that's a fun way to do it. But it's not better or worse than any other way to role play, right? And like all of the other forms of role playing, there's a lot of nuance, right? A lot of different stuff. For me, what did I used to do? God, 2001, year 2000, year 2001, I did a lot of online forum-based exalted roleplay on the official White Wolf RP forums. Definitely. Yeah, I played a lot of that. A lot of narrating imaginary kung fu with other people. Now, I don't want to get into, someone in chat says something I disagree with, which is that it's one of the most immersive ways to roleplay. I don't think I agree with that, but we're not here to talk about immersion. If it works for you and you feel like you're having a good time, rock and roll, right? Try it out. Check out Storium, check out IRC servers, check out Discord. You know, you can find a place where you can get together with other people who are more interested in narrating in that way. As an aside, sort of as a real quick aside, it's also, if you are a shy person, if you don't feel comfortable like doing voices, but you know there's some good narrative in your noodle, I find it a lot easier to write things than I do to say them. So maybe you will too. Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. This has been episode number 96 of Office Hours. Stay healthy out there. Try a virtual tabletop. Don't get sick. Keep playing role-playing games. And if you have questions, www.adam-koble.com. Click on that link, submit your question, and we'll answer them in a future episode. Go wash your hands. Have a good one, everybody. We'll see you next time.